Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. I was going to go through the major transits going on for the upcoming month, or this month, October 2022. We've already started it. We're a few days in. And the theme of the month is birthing something new. So just to note, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support, and then you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this. So let's just go through the dates of when things are shifting around in the skies during October. And just as a reminder, in Vedic astrology, and again I do Vedic astrology, this isn't Western astrology, so some of these things will be different because the planets and where they sit in the sky are measured differently, among other things. But Vedic astrology generally emphasizes slow-moving planets such as Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu. So Jupiter's not really changing, Saturn is moving out of retrograde into a progressive state, but Rahu and Ketu are going to be involved in a solar eclipse, partial solar eclipse towards the end of the month. So those are the slow transits, but you'll see that the energy will be building up through the month. So in any case, October 2nd, so just a few days ago, Mercury went direct. It was retrograde, and so there might be this general feeling of starting to make some progress instead of spinning your wheels. And then today, there's a full moon in Pisces, or Meena is the Sanskrit term for Pisces. So it's going to kind of start off a little bit slow and actually pretty nice. And then the middle of the month is when we're going to start to see things shifting. So October 15th, Mars will be entering Gemini or Mithuna. It's been in Taurus for a few months, so it's going to shift signs finally. Usually Mars does not take that long to shift signs. And then a couple days later, October 17th, Sun moves into Libra. It's currently in Virgo. So the Sun will be moving into Libra, where it's debilitated actually. Tula is the Sanskrit name for Libra. The day after that, Venus will enter Libra. So Venus is following the Sun. Venus and Mercury are never far away from the Sun because they're so close to it. So they're usually almost always within one sign of where the Sun is. They all kind of tag along together. And then also on the 18th, Mercury goes combust again, or goes asta, because again it is so close to the Sun. It was combust a few weeks ago, then it came out of combustion. Now it's going back into combustion for a while. And then on October 22nd, Saturn goes direct. It's been retrograde for a few months, and so that means it's going to be leaving Capricorn in a few months, which is usually Saturn changing signs is a big deal. But it's not changing signs, it's just going direct this month. And then October 25th, there's going to be a partial solar eclipse in Libra. So this is going to be the big event for the month. The day after that, Mercury enters Libra. So again, there's going to be this pile up of planets in Libra. And then on October 30th, Mars goes retrograde, or Vakri. So it's just kind of stepped into Gemini for a couple weeks, and then it's going to start spinning back towards Taurus. So that's going to make Mars inherently unstable, but we'll talk more about that. So those are the dates to kind of look out for during the current month. So let's talk about Mercury first. Last month was all about Mercury, if you saw my kind of analysis for September. But October, we're shifting into more of a Venus and Saturn combination, really. So again, on October 2nd, Mercury went direct. It's still in its own sign of Virgo or Kanya. So it's very strong. Any planet in its own sign is strong. Plus being retrograde is considered another primary strength. Plus Mercury is the only planet when it's in its own sign, specifically a Virgo, that it's also considered exalted. So it had triple primary strength until it went direct on October 2nd, but it has two levels of strength still until it eventually moves into Libra at the end of the month. the day after the eclipse. So again, Mercury symbolizes decision making, organization, communication. So you might have been feeling like you were spinning your wheels or kind of taking 2 steps back, that sort of thing. But you should probably feel like you're starting to make some progress forward since Mercury went direct. On the 18th, Mercury goes combust again, or asta. So again, what that means is when a planet is combust, it's very close to the sun, so the sun basically eclipses it because the sun's so bright. And so what that means for a planet when it goes combust is that you won't see the outer aspects of what the planet symbolizes so much, but the deeper inner qualities of that planet will be felt and experienced. So especially with Mercury, which represents things like thinking, contemplating, ruminating, you might find that it's actually, and I've been hearing this from a few people, that they've been having a hard time kind of controlling their thoughts, and that's because, again, Mercury had triple primary strength in its own sign, so Mercury was going gangbusters the last few weeks. So that will be shifting very soon by the end of the month. And then October 22nd, Mercury enters Libra. Again, this is the day after the solar eclipse. And because the solar eclipse is happening in Libra, which is ruled by Venus, and Venus will be there in that sign at the time of the eclipse, and literally within a degree of the sun and moon, is that's going to be what we would consider kind of a Venus-dominated eclipse. And so Mercury coming in after the eclipse happens, it's kind of like there's going to be this bursting forth of feelings or epiphanies regarding feelings and emotions and relationships, probably. And then Mercury's going to kind of come in there and try to make sense of it all after, this sort of big shift happens with the eclipse. Because, again, eclipses are always inherently, kind of wild cards. You never quite know, what's going to happen on an eclipse. And so you kind of expect the unexpected. So that's going to be Mercury. So, again, we're kind of shifting out of Mercury mode. Again, if you saw my report last month, it was all about Mercury, and so we're shifting gears here. And then we have Mars. So Mars, I mentioned on October 15th, Mars is going to enter Gemini, Mithuna. It's been hanging out in Taurus for a very long time. Mars is not super comfortable in either Taurus or Gemini. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury. And both of those planets are considered enemies of Mars. So Mars isn't very comfortable here. And since Mars has been in an enemy sign and will be in an enemy sign for quite a while, actually, because we'll talk about Mars is going to go retrograde, go back to Taurus for a while and not leave Taurus until I think it's March. So almost 6 months of Mars is sort of hanging out, which, again, Mars usually changes signs about every 40-45 days, although Mars is an erratic planet. It doesn't have as straight of a trajectory or travel pattern as other planets. That's why it's considered it represents rebelliousness, because it doesn't follow the straight and narrow rules, so to speak. In any case, Mars also represents things like action, innovation, risk-taking, rebelliousness, going against the grain, siblings, enemies, accidents, surgeries, acute illnesses, fire. Generally, it's a fire planet. So when it moves into Gemini, it's going to aspect Virgo, which is where Mercury is. So you might actually get even more action in the mind, more thinking, more ruminating, and it's going to be aspecting Saturn and Capricorn. So there's also going to be some action, grounded action as well. So Mars is going to kind of light a fire where those two planets are sitting. Just briefly though, because on October 30th Mars goes retrograde. It's going to go back to Taurus or Vrishabha, which is a Venus-ruled sign. Again, still in a secondary weakness for Mars. And we're going from Gemini, which is an air sign or thoughts and ideas, to an earth sign of Taurus. So it's kind of like you kind of get some new ideas, and then you kind of go back to the drawing board and see how you can make them reality. Yeah, I mean, not just have some idea in your head, but how do you manifest it in the real world. The thing though is that with Mars kind of stepping into Gemini and backing into Taurus or whatever, Mars is basically going to be in Sundi, and Sundi means that a planet is within 1 degree of the beginning or end of a sign for a whole month, from October 11th until November 17th. And when a planet is in Sundi, it's considered unstable. So Mars already represents kind of instability or erratic patterns. So Mars is going to be even more erratic. Luckily, Mars will not be involved with the eclipse, because that could be like, wow, like really, I mean, too much. I think this eclipse is already going to be pretty intense. But again, we're going from Earth, air, Earth. So, you know, doing, thinking, back to doing, and I'm thinking again. Yeah. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So plans, whatever you've had planned and we're working on, you might get some new ideas, rethink things, and then go back to planning and kind of going back to the drawing board, so to speak. And again, luckily Mars is not aspecting the solar eclipse. But what this means is that Mars might catch your attention with whatever it's spinning in your life, because there will be some spin there. And then kind of out of the blue at the end of the month on the 25th, there's going to be kind of this other event that happens that's going to be out of the blue. And so because there are going to be two kind of areas or 2 different fires, you might be feeling like you're spinning plates trying to take care of everything or deal with the fallout or changes. It's not necessarily negative, but it will require some energy, effort, focus to sort of handle whatever comes forward from these 2 different events. Yeah. Okay, so the moon. So we'll talk about the full moon that's happening today, October 9th. The moon is in Pisces, so that's pretty nice. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, so it's a Jupiterian sign, and there are no enemies in Jupiter's signs. I mean, Jupiter is the great benefic, so whenever a planet is in a Jupiterian sign, either Sagittarius or Pisces, they're fairly neutral. They won't get a lot of kickback or anything like that. So that's good. So that's going to mean that moon isn't disturbed by being in the sign. And as you can see from this chart here, this chart is drawn up for almost the exact about an hour away from the time when the sun and the moon are in exact alignment to create the full moon, the exact full moon. Yeah. So we're just, I think, less than an hour away when this chart is drawn up. I drew this chart up because of I wanted there to be Libra ascendant. So you'll see the top diamond here. That's considered the first house of the 12 houses, and the first house is also the rising sign. So I just wanted to give this chart a comparison to what's coming up from the eclipse. Yeah. So the moon is with Jupiter. Jupiter's super strong. It's in its own sign. It's retrograde. So that's really great. When the moon and Jupiter are like this together, it forms what we call a Gajakesar yoga. Gajakesar yoga is an indication that somebody has a pretty wide network and knows a lot of people. Like, it's kind of a networking yoga. So when you see Jupiter and moon together, especially when it's in a Kendra, so Kendra means the center 4 squares. Those are Kendra houses. So here it would be 7, 10, 1, 4, Libra, Capricorn, Aries, and Cancer for this particular chart, if this was somebody's chart. Also, when Jupiter and Moon together, that usually indicates a lot of travel. Okay. Yeah, so let's see. Let me back up a little bit. So the moon in this full moon today is going to be in a nakshatra lunar mansion called Revati. The symbol of this lunar mansion is a drum used to mark time. So things related to time. The other thing is that Revati is the last nakshatra of the zodiac. So there's also can be some association with Indians because it's their last sign. And the deity associated with Revati is Pushan. Pushan is a deity related to nurturance, safe travel, so like hospitality. Like when you travel, to be able to stay in a nice place, somebody's house or hotel or whatever, and get supplied with good food and water because you're out of your element, you're out of your home, there's less control, right? So that's all very nice. And as part of that too, Revati can symbolize foster care because it's kind of the same. It's like when somebody, for example, doesn't have parents or their parents are unavailable to take care of them. To have good foster parents means like you're being taken care of, you're still being nurtured and provided for despite not being in your natural element. Revati can also indicate pediatric diseases. So generally it's a nice, gentle, well-meaning, likable nakshatra. So that's nice. So that's why this full moon might seem very easy flowing. Pisces is a water sign, so you might get all the good feels right now. Plus the moon is aspected by the sun, Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter. So all the benefics, Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter, are aspecting the moon. The moon is in Jupiterian sign, Pisces, water. Like, it's going to feel pretty good right now for most people. Again, every chart's going to be different. And if, for example, Jupiter is a Chidra Graha for you, a Chidra Graha is a planet that can symbolize diseases and ill health, then this may not be a great combination, but probably most people are feeling pretty good right now. It is a little bit of the calm before the storm, frankly, but especially if this Jupiter-Moon combination is on the 3-9 axis, because the third house is related to short travel, and the 9th house is related to long travel. You'll get even more probably of somebody who's really a big traveler. And relating to the networking aspect of Jupiter and Moon together, especially when that combination is related to the 11th house of clubs, groups, societies, you're going to have somebody who's like gangbuster, always out meeting people, la la la. So that's kind of what the full moon today is providing in terms of energy. But the shift is coming. So this is a chart for the partial solar eclipse that's happening in Libra on October 25th. The exact time is 6:47 a.m. and that's Eastern Standard Time, so adjust for wherever you are. But on the 17th of October, the sun is going to enter Libra. Yeah, so if you look back at the previous chart, you'll see there was like up in the upper right corner, there was Mercury, Sun, Venus, right? And they were all shining across the 6-12 axis towards Jupiter and Pisces with the moon there. But in a couple weeks, the sun is shifted to the first house, Venus is shifted to the first house, Mercury's not shifted yet, but it will shift the next day. So Sun and Venus are shifting one sign over to join K2, the south node of the moon. K2 is being aspected by Saturn. Saturn aspects 10 houses away, and Saturn's in its own sign. So it's very strong. Luckily, as I mentioned, Saturn, I think it was the 22nd, gets out of retrograde and goes progressive. So Saturn is not as strong as it was. It's starting to kind of shift out of this Jupiterian energy. But so we have Saturn and K2 here, Sun and Venus just rolled over, and then the moon travels so fast. I mean, it travels the whole chart. It does a 360 turnaround the chart about 27.5 days. So within 2 weeks, you basically ended up on the other side of the chart here. So this big orange circle, you've got 4 planets. Yeah. And when you have 4 planets like this, it forms what's called Pravraja Yoga. So this can be an area of that's related to spirituality. It can also represent an area of focus in somebody's life. Yeah. So let's see. So there is going to be this strong focus here, especially with Saturn aspecting. The other thing to notice here is that Saturn in Capricorn also aspects 3 houses away, so it's going to be reflecting onto, aspecting onto this Jupiter retrograde in Pisces. So there's going to be a lot of Saturnian energy mixed with this Jupiter. You might actually say that Saturn is because it's a one-sided aspect, you might actually say that Saturn is kind of has its grips on Jupiter here. The other thing is Mars is circled here. The reason why is, look at it, it's in 1 degree 15 seconds of Gemini. So as I mentioned, planets are in Sunday and are unstable when they're in their 1st degree. So Mars is not directly aspecting onto this eclipse, but on its own, it's unstable, and it might be causing other, kind of things going on, untoward things. And then Mercury's also circled here. Mercury's in 28 degrees 29 seconds, so it's almost in the last degree. So Mercury's also unstable. So again, so Saturn has its grips on Jupiter. Saturn has its grips on this whole eclipse. Mercury's unstable. Mars is unstable. Like it's a little bit of a nail biter, frankly. And then the other thing is, during this eclipse, you can see the moon and sun are in exact same degree, but Venus is within 1 degree of all this. So that means that Venus is going to be eclipsed. It's going to be combust. The moon is going to be combust. And then the sun is also going to be in combust. So there's some support here because Venus is in its own sign. So that should provide a little bit of stability here. But the sun is debilitated. That makes it more unstable. So it's going to be like a little bit of rock and roll. Luckily, with Venus being in the sign as this eclipse is happening, even if on the surface, because the planets that are visible, that are involved in this eclipse, are going to be Saturn, which is the great malefic. Saturn represents things that are like old and decrepit, worn down. They can represent anxiety, that sort of thing, depression. And K2 can represent sudden change. And let me go back. Saturn can also represent death and chronic disease. K2 can represent, mental health issues, sudden, violent, erratic behavior. It's almost like Mars with even more sort of twisted up. And K2 can represent things like separation and sudden, like, sort of letting go or dislodging of things. So the 2 planets involved in this eclipse are going to be Saturn and K2, because Venus, Moon, and Sun are going to be eclipsed with each other. Yeah. So on the surface, this eclipse, it may look like, not great. Okay, let's put it that way. But again, I have some hope, because Venus is in its own sign, and Venus is a benefic planet, that something good, even if on the surface or in the initial stages of this eclipse, whatever is done away with, and that seems like what's happening here, something is being let go of, something may literally die, unfortunately. That with Venus being in its own sign, it gives me hope that regardless of what happens here during this eclipse, that something good will come out of it. Okay, and so let's see, let me just go through my notes here, make sure I covered everything. So again, Sun enters Libra on October 17th. Sun is debilitated, Nietzsche in Sanskrit, so it has a primary weakness. Again, that's going to make Sun unstable. On October 18th, Venus enters Libra. Venus is in the Sun sign, gives it strength, and again, it gives you some hope that, or indication that something good will come out of this, even if outwardly it's not a welcomed event. So Venus is going to dominate this eclipse inwardly. So inwardly, there's still going to be some light of compassion, or some diplomacy, or some goodwill, I would say. even if it's not expressed, because again, Venus is going to be eclipsed since it's combust during this time. The other thing is that, you know, this, because the Venus, the ascendant, moon and sun are all lined up here, that means that this is what we call a Sudarshan Lagna. That means that the ascendant sign, the moon sign, and the sun sign are all in the same sign. And that means that, like, no matter, because we can analyze charts based on the rising sign, the moon sign, the sun sign, and we typically integrate that information. But when you have the rising sign, sun sign, moon sign, all in the same sign, like, there's no integration. Like, it's just, you know, the karma is there. It's very clear, and it's very fixed, for better or worse. So there's going to be a lot of power and strength in this, you know, eclipse. The Pravraja Yoga I already mentioned. That's again, classically it's considered a spiritual yoga, but today it might show up more as, in modern times, it might show up more as like a particular focus in somebody's life. And because this eclipse is happening in Libra, and also, again, there's, you know, the ascendant is at 1 degree, so the ascendant also is also a bit unstable. But in any case, the first house is related to physicality, general health, the way somebody looks, like what you outwardly see about a person. Yeah, and so somebody, again, might seem very Saturn Ketu like, because those are the planets you can see during the eclipse, with Venus, Moon, and Sun being eclipsed. So it might be, you know, and Sun and Ketu represent like foreigners or strangers, or maybe not the best sort of folks you might want to socialize, potentially, if you're looking for peace in your life. Yeah, but again, Venus being there should be helpful. And this first sign also represents things like personality and mentality, like things like when you first meet somebody, the things that you notice about them, the personality, their face, their head, their body, general conditioning, those are all first house things. Yeah, so this is going to be, you know, especially the, you know, Libra folks out there, you know, they might have a little bit of a doozy with this eclipse. Yeah, so and I mentioned the sun, Saturn is also aspecting it. It goes direct on October 22nd. So again, because Saturn is so strong, and it's visible, and it's aspecting both Jupiter, which is out of the picture. I mean, it would have been nice to have Jupiter being so strong in Pisces and retrograde aspecting this eclipse. That would have helped to stabilize the eclipse, but it's Saturn instead, aspecting both Jupiter and the eclipse. So outwardly, this is going to be a very Saturnian, outwardly eclipse. Yeah. And I mentioned Mercury and Mars are in Sandhi, so they're unstable. And then the nakshatra that this eclipse is happening is Swati. So I'm going to get into Swati, but this is the lineup here. And when I just kind of, you know, get all this information, I just sit with this kind of chart. And just briefly, Swati is symbolized by like new blades of grass. So something very fine, fragile, that sort of thing. And new beginnings typically symbolized by Swati. Venus can represent women, Moon can represent women, it can also represent the arts. So when I put all this together, the kind of visual that I get is like something has to die or be let go of in order for an artist to emerge. maybe it's old ideas, old patterns. I mean, Saturn is in the 4th house. The 4th house represents family, ancestors. Yeah. So maybe, you know, and Saturn and Ketu, for example, can represent things like machinery and manufacturing and things that aren't related to living beings. So it's kind of like an artist emerging from a engineering family or something like that. Yeah. The other kind of visual I got was because Venus and Moon are there, they represent women, the Sun represents father, so Moon and Sun together represent parents. I could also see how this sort of pattern could show up as like a relatively young parents, maybe mother during childbirth or father who has some sudden accident where they pass away and leave behind a child, or it could be the child who's born and doesn't survive, unfortunately. Venus being in its own sign, it will protect things that are non-living. So Venus representing arts, again, that's why an artist might be emerging, you know, shedding layers of thoughts, patterns, beliefs inherited from family and ancestors. But Venus in its own sign will not necessarily protect a living being who's represented by that planet. So women, counselors, mothers, fathers, and sons in there too. Yeah, so just so you get a vibe on this whole thing. And let me just mention quickly that you'll see here in the diagram on October 25th this yellow blob that covers pretty much all of Europe, the Middle East, northeastern Africa, you know, extends to India, Russia. This is where the solar eclipse will be visible, and this is where the effects of the solar eclipse will be more visible in life. Yeah, so if you live in this area, again, you know, move forward with caution. I wanted to get into Libra a little bit so you have a chance to understand that sign. And part of the reason why I wanted to put this up here, this information, is because Libra in Vedic astrology has a different energy or vibe than Libra in Western astrology. In Western astrology, Libra is represented by the scales, but the scales of justice. So typically, what I've seen, again, I'm not an expert in Western astrology, but I've seen in Western astrology, you know, correct me if I'm off base here, but Libras in Western astrology are typically seen as being very sensitive, you know, liking balance, meaning that they're also sort of conflict averse. You know, they don't like to rock the boat, you know, that sort of thing, like very peaceful, gentle, loving people who kind of, you know, hide in their shell, you know, if there's too much conflict going on, that sort of thing. Not true in Vedic astrology. That's not Libra in Vedic astrology. So especially if somebody has a Libra or ascendant, rising sign, or Lagna, ascendant, rising sign, and Lagna are all different words for the same thing. This is kind of their world. I'll just go through it. So the symbol is the scales, but of a shop, not justice. So people who have a Libra rising sign in Vedic astrology are often merchants, like they get into business. Because also Venus rules Libra, and Venus is the natural, Libra, is the natural 7th house of independent business in any chart. Okay, so again, you have like this confluence of kind of merchant marketplace energy. Libra ascendant people tend to like public professions because the 10th house of employment is lorded over by the moon, and the moon represents the public. So again, that's what most merchants do, they interface with the public. Because Venus is debilitated in the 12th house, or Bhava, it can mean that Libra folks can have difficulty with expenditures because the 12th house is related to expenditures. And it also might mean that they have difficulty with like hooking up with people sexually. That, you know, things might not go as planned. Since Venus is an enemy to Jupiter, And Jupiter is sort of the sage, wise, spiritual counselor. Libra folks may not listen to solid advice. They might kind of just do their own thing. Libra is also considered a Chara Rashi. A Chara Rashi is an active sign. So Libra folks are doers. They're doing things. They're always kind of moving and active. And they're an air sign, so there's a lot of ideas. So sort of active activity, restlessness, and ideas. It can show up as like rebelliousness in Libras, which is almost the opposite view of Libra rising or Libra important people who have important Libra connections in their chart in Western astrology. The fifth house in a Libra rising chart is ruled by the sun, so they tend to be very sociable, but the sun is debilitated in Libra, so they might be that should be the 11th house. I should fix that. Hopefully I remember to do that. So the 11th house is ruled by the sun. So that means that there's going to be a lot of energy in the 11th house, and the 11th house is all about clubs, group societies, so they like to, socialize, which helps them, if they're marketers, marketeers. But the sun is debilitated in Libra, so they might socialize, but they, again, might get led astray by the people that they associate with. Libra rising folks may have an interest in politics because Saturn is the lord of the fourth house, which represents masses, and the fifth house, which represents governing bodies. So they might be interested in politics, but maybe not so much children, even because Saturn is not considered sort of a great sign because it's so dry, and it's not a great planet most of the time relating to children. It's not like Jupiter or something like that, or the moon or Venus or something like that, in regards to children. So politics, maybe, children, maybe not so much. Also, the moon rules the second house of family and the seventh house of partner. So again, there's going to be more fire energy related to family and partnership. So again, there's going to be a lot of relationship stuff, energy going on, maybe a lot of relationships, but again, the quality of them, you'd have to really look at somebody's chart. And then again, Libra in general represents places, public places like shops, marketplaces, busy towns. So you can see that like there's several layers of this whole merchant energy. And I also wanted to bring up like the photograph here. This relates to the eclipse and Libra, and then I'm going to talk about Swati Nakshatra next. But this photograph I took recently at the Catherine Violet Hubbard Animal Sanctuary here in Connecticut. And the reason why I included it is that actually Catherine Violet Hubbard, you may not know her. She was a child who passed away when she was 6 years old. And she passed away at the Sandy Hook school shooting that happened here in Connecticut in 2012. So the 10-year anniversary is coming up in December. And I was really struck by the story of this, that, here she was, this little child, innocent child, who got caught up in this massacre shooting. But even so, even within the few years that she was here on the planet and this particular form, she has this legacy, of she loved animals. She was a very sweet child, and I guess her family decided that they were going to make her memory one of hope, and the whole kind of mission of this animal sanctuary is that animals should experience kindness the way humans should. It's just very sweet, very beautiful, very deep. I looked at her chart because I had a birth date in place, but I didn't have a time. And when I spun the chart to the moon, she happens to have Jupiter and Moon in Libra and Swati. Yeah. So that was a little bit eerie, frankly. But again, Jupiter and Moon together, networking, Jupiter and Moon together, traveling. So her, again, even though she's not in her little body anymore, has this long living legacy. And Jupiter, again, spirituality, beneficence, Moon, the mind, like this is a... And then she also had Venus aspecting it. So she basically had all the benefic planets, like they're aspecting her Moon, which is the mind, and her, so that was very interesting. I also did briefly look at the moment when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, and at that time, Saturn was in Swati. So Saturn was in Libra Swati when the shooting happened. So again, I wanted to bring this up because, again, it might be another kind of example of this eclipse energy that's coming our way. Because it doesn't seem too dissimilar. I mean, who at first glance is going to say, yeah, school shooting of innocent, kindergartners, is a great thing, right? That's very much like a potentially Saturn K2 combination type event. But the fact that, her family was able to choose to take that event and turn it into something positive, that's the Venus aspect of this whole eclipse. So keep that in mind. Regardless of what shows up on eclipse day for you. Yeah. And then let me talk about Swati Nakshatra, because this is the lunar mansion where the eclipse is happening in. So we're going to have, I think it's all of them? No. K2, so 4 planets, K2, Venus, Moon, Sun, are all in Swati. The ascendant is in Chitra. So Chitra is symbolized by a gemstone. And it can kind of symbolize like structure and stuff like that, like sometimes architecture, that kind of thing is related to Chitra. But Swati, I mentioned briefly, the symbol of Swati Nakshatra is a young sprout quivering in the wind, so young grass, yeah. Very delicate, very frail. The deities related to Swati Nakshatra are Vayu, the wind, so again, this kind of like wind blowing in the grass, new wind blowing in the grass. You can again get the sense that it's like vulnerable, fragile. And also Saraswati, so the goddess of learning, speech, and the arts. So again, we have Venus and Moon, in Venus's sign. So again, this could be the emergence, the emergence of an artist. Maybe somebody who, was doing something completely unrelated to the arts and finally decided this is what I'm, I can't not be me anymore, and so they kind of step forward with their artistic ability. And again, this nakshatra represents new beginnings, adaptability, because again, the grass is wavering, right? It's not like steel, it's the opposite of steel. And because you have new growth happening, like there's a striving for growth and independence. People with the moon in Swati can be very philosophical, thoughtful, spiritual, religious. There's this, vibe of purification, vulnerability and fragility, but there can also be a lot of instability here because again you just have this new sweet little grass blade growing through the ground, and if you step on it when it's that young, it may not survive. So the other thing is this restlessness. So again, the young grass blowing in the wind. There's a lot of wind and vata. If you're into Ayurveda or traditional Indian medicine, vata is like the wind energy. That may be disturbed. And it's funny, like, when I've met people in person, and there's some people you meet right off the bat and you just automatically feel how nervous they are, and they're just an anxious person and they're always kind of worried, and they may be sort of always kind of planning, because it's like they're trying to buffer themselves from, in a way, life, the world, because they're so sensitive, so fragile. I always kind of like the nakshatra that usually comes to mind first is like, oh, I wonder, I think to myself, oh, I wonder if they have planets in Swati. And a lot of times they do. So I've found artists. I'm not sure that they've all been artists. Again, it depends on what planets are there. But definitely the nervousness, restlessness, anxiety piece, you can like almost see it in their body. Like they feel tense to be around, Rahu, Venus, and Saturn as planets are very powerful here. So, we have Venus and Swati, it's powerful. Saturn's aspecting all this, powerful. And Saturn's aspecting from its own sign. So, there's going to be a lot of energy in this eclipse. Also related to this, Swati Nakshatra is independent spirit, mental strength, merchants, again, ascetics like spiritual or religious ascetics or devotional ascetics, and then students of profound subjects. So again, this is, the Saraswati, goddess of learning aspect. Okay, so this is Swati Nakshatra. So, again, fragile, but, beautiful too. Beautiful. Yeah. So I wanted to give you a chart of somebody that embodies all of this Swati energy. So here's a celebrity chart. Their moon is in Libra Swati. So let's take a look. So I didn't have an exact birth time. This is the chart of Eadweard Muybridge. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He I'll get into his story if you don't know him. But this is the moon rising chart for him. I didn't have an exact birth time, so I spun it to the moon, and his moon happened to be in Swati. So in Libra Swati. He was born April 9th of 1830 in Kingston, UK. Again, I don't know a birth time. But let's take a look at this chart. So moon is in Libra here. So Libra, because I spun it to the moon, is the rising sign for the moon. Let's just go around the chart. So if we go 3 houses, we go counterclockwise. So we go Libra, Scorpio, Jupiter, number 9, in the upper left corner here. Look, we have Jupiter in its own sign. It's not in the same sign. It's not in Pisces, but it's in its own sign. So that's a recreation of what's going on in the current sky pattern. Interesting. Okay, we have Mars in the 10th house. That one's not recreated, but that's okay. There's plenty of those being recreated here. And then the 5th house, we have Saturn based sign. So this is Aquarius, and we have Venus and Ketu. Oh, look, Venus and Ketu are back together. So Venus represents the arts. The 5th house represents creativity. And Ketu is kind of this like unusual, sudden surprising element. So some sort of surprising art very much could be that's involved in this person's life. And the fact that Ketu is with Venus, you can potentially take K2 and aspect it 5 and 9 houses away. If you do a 9th house away aspect, that means that Venus and K2 are aspecting the 1st house. So that would mean that you have Moon, Venus, and K2 in the 1st house of Libra. So you have 3 of the 4 planets that are currently, or that are going to end up in Libra when the eclipse happens. So that's a recreation there. And then let's see, the 6th house is Pisces. You have Mercury and Sun. Oh, look at that. Mercury aspects 7 houses away. So Mercury is going to be aspecting Virgo. So that means that you're going to, in a way, have Mercury and Virgo again. So that's recreated. Yeah, I'm getting a picture here. And then if we go to the 10th house, we're going to have Saturn retrograde in the 10th house. It's going to aspect back 7 signs away into Capricorn. So basically we have Saturn retrograde in Capricorn energy again. So Jupiter's to a certain extent recreated, Venus and K2 in the rising sign with Moon recreated, Mercury in Virgo recreated, Saturn retrograde in Capricorn recreated. I mean, like you can't make this stuff up. So who is this guy? And it's funny, I was watching a movie. I'm interested in photography. I was watching this movie. This happens to be a photographer. And he was born in 1830. So, why is he famous even today, actually? Is that he was actually a bookseller. He was born in the UK. He was a bookseller. He came to the United States to sort of make his way in life and make his name. And then he was, I think he sold his bookshop to his brother. I'm trying to remember. He sold his bookshop to his brother. He was in San Francisco. Sold his bookshop to his brother. Was going to go back to the UK. Took a stagecoach back across the country, but there was like this horrible stagecoach accident in Texas, I believe. And I think the driver was killed, and everybody was like really, maimed. And he hit his head really badly. And apparently hit his head so badly that like it changed his personality. So like the accounts are that before the accident he was a sort of pleasant businessman, and after the accident he became this eccentric artist. Okay, and as part of his therapy, he eventually got back to the UK, and he was under, I think, the care of the doctor who took care of Queen Victoria. I couldn't believe like all this guy's connections. So yeah, I mean, if you got his if I looked at his real chart, he would have to have, I think, a pretty outstanding 11th house, because the 11th house is clubs, groups, society, socializing, and stuff like that. So probably like, yeah, one of these, planets in its own sign is going to be in his 11th house, because he had some incredible connections. Like, he was friends with Leland Stanford, who was the governor of California, and who, the town of Stanford, California was named, and Stanford University was named. Like, that was his friend. Like, he was commissioned by Leland Stanford to do some photographs of horses. Anyway, like, it's pretty incredible, the people that he knew. Anyway, after the accident, part of his therapy that was suggested to him was to be outside a lot and to stay away from alcohol and meat, so really like strong elements in nutrition, that sort of thing. So anyway, even before the accident, they don't know how much he really knew about photography before the accident, but he was getting into like printmaking and stuff because his books had a lot of illustration. So he was sort of like on the fringe there, was sort of around photographers and stuff. But anyway, after the accident, like photography blew up for this guy. And he really got into photographing movement of the human body. So how does the body move? So and again, he was this eccentric artist, unconventional, strange person who he got people, and again, this is Victorian times, he got people to strip down and do different motions in the nude, like hit a tennis ball or jump over a chair or sweep the floor, so that he could he was obsessed really with movement. And he wanted to photograph that. He was also obsessed with how you take a still photograph and turn it into like living movement. So he started stringing all these photographs together. Like, he would line up 24 photographs and have somebody walk across, and he would like click, 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 click successively the cameras to basically take still shots, every few seconds or so, and then he would string them together to basically create a movie. So I think it was in 1893 World's Fair. Don't quote me on that date. He actually had a room set up so he could show his strung together photographs that were moving so quickly one after the other that it looked like, like the elephant moving or the horse moving was actually moving. And it was actually the first cinema hall, basically, is what it created. But he was like this wild guy and screaming, at people, very eccentric, very volatile, and like so volatile that I guess his wife, he had a young wife, I think there's a 20-year difference, which interesting, like Venus with K2, Venus represents a spouse, and K2, when Venus and K2 are together, it usually indicates that there's some very strange characteristic of the spouse, and that could be like a disparity in income or race or nationality, or something like that. In any case, in their case, it was like, you know, I think there's like more than 20 difference between them, so that was a big thing back then. And she, because he was so obsessed with all these photographs or something and was gone a lot, she ended up getting involved with a mutual friend. He found out about it, found out that maybe the child she had that he thought was his son was actually the other guy's. So he showed up at this guy's house and like shot him in the chest, and went to trial. Like, he didn't fight it. He said, yeah, I killed the guy. Went to trial, and he actually got off the murder charges because he was granted, like, he was acquitted because, what did they call it? They called it justifiable homicide, because most of the people in jury, which were probably men at that time, would have done the same thing if their wife had been seduced by some, you know, philandering guy. And apparently he was the last person in the United States to have that justifiable homicide acquittal basis. So very, you know, the photography already strange, traveler like crazy, you know, and you're going to get traveling from this guy too, because Jupiter's going to aspect into the 7th house here in this moon chart, so that's going to be Aries. And then the moon is also going to aspect right across, so you actually get this reproduction of Jupiter and moon. So there's going to be a lot of travel for this guy as well. That's probably related to, it could be the 7th house for him, or the 3rd or the 9th, because again, 3rd is short travel, and 9th is long distance travel. And he traveled all over the world, I mean, for his entire life, before he eventually ended up at University of Pennsylvania. And again, this obsessive nature with his art, again, K2 can represent obsession, compulsion, mental illness, that sort of thing, and Venus can be arts, and again, this is in the 5th house of arts. He created like over 100,000 photographs at University of Pennsylvania, which is like, I mean, talk about prolific. You know, and again, it was like this weird eccentric guy, you know, getting people to broom, you know, sweep the floor naked so you could take pictures of movements and stuff. And his photographs and study of the human body in motion, again, is still being used apparently by artists and medical people and that sort of thing. Besides the fact that he also is thought of by some people as the grandfather of current cinema in the film. And K2 and Rahu can also represent film and video, photography. So, you know, there's several layers of confluence here. Although back in the day, I was looking at some other charts by photographers, and most of those photographers actually had very strong Mars and Saturn, because Mars is like this innovation and Saturn is like perseverance. So it's almost like this athletic combination, but it's related to their art. Also, Mars and Saturn together are like minerals and fire and chemistry, which is basically, especially if you're doing silver-based photography, very important. But I've noticed that when I look at photographers from today, they typically have a lot of planets related, especially Venus and Moon, because they're art-related planets, in the nakshatra of Ardra. Ardra is symbolized by a bolt of lightning, so electricity, because we're doing digital photography now. So that's also kind of interesting to see how even certain professions shift, but the planets are still relevant. Yeah. So anyway, Eadweard Muybridge is an embodiment of a lot of the energies going on with this eclipse coming up on October 25th. So just to make it a little bit more concrete rather than all abstract. Yeah. So general advice for an eclipse. It's usually advised not to take on anything new if you want it to end well, because there is all this erratic, you know, unsteady energy, not just for this eclipse, but generally. You can't really fight the energy. I mean, you can't really kind of hole up in your house. Like, the energy will still come, like, whether through a phone call, or I remember a few months back, Venus crossed Rahu, and Venus represents a car. Rahu, is kind of symbolized by a snake. I was walking out to my car at the garage. I opened up the garage door, and something fell right in front of my face. I was like, what? It happened to be a snake. So as I was walking to my car, Venus, a snake, Rahu, fell on my head. I was like, I can't believe it. So anyway, the karma is going to play itself out. You can't run from karma. But I would definitely take it easy. If you have a choice of not starting something at this time, that's probably best. Also, don't go looking for the eclipse and like bathing in it the way around here in the United States, a lot of people, like when there's a big eclipse, people travel across the country and like bathe in the energy. You're basically bathing in a lot of unstable energy. In India, for example, they typically will close temples because they don't want all that erratic energy in the temples disturbing things. So spiritual practices like prayer, meditation, mantra, that's all best. And there's typically an eclipse tunnel. So 2 weeks, the eclipses always come in pairs, sometimes in threes. So it's kind of, you may start to feel the effects of the eclipse 2 weeks before the first one. There'll be 2 weeks until the next one, and there'll be 2 weeks after. So it's kind of a 6 weeks period where what I typically find is unusual things will happen. Like, just, you don't even realize that you have expectations of life, whether they're negative or positive, until something different happens out of your expectation realm or experience realm, and you're like, oh, okay, that was a little bit strange. But I literally could take notes every day, like some strange thing. I was like, wow, that was strange. And it was like one day after the other, and I'm like, oh, okay, we're building up to the eclipse here. Because again, Rahu and Ketu are just, all about odd, strange, eccentric, things that happen, things that go against the grain. So probably what you want to figure out for yourself is which house and axis, Libra or Tula, is in your chart, to figure out what aspect of your life will probably be affected by this eclipse. So again, the 6-12 axis, we have debts and enemies, then losses and isolation. The 5-11 axis, children and creativity, and then groups and income. The 4-10 axis, home and career. 3-9 axis, siblings, communication. Then fathers, religion, higher education. The 2-8 axis, so family of origin and beginnings. And then 8 is spouses, family, and endings. And the 1-7 axis, self and health, versus relationships and independent business. So get a copy of your chart and find out where Libra is, would be my recommendation. So thank you for your time. I hope you have found this interesting and helpful to understand the planets, how they're moving in the sky this month, and how the energies that they symbolize might show up and manifest for you, and how to kind of ride the wave rather than fight it. And again, good things can come out of even the things that seem the worst. Again, not to project negativity here, I don't mean that, but most likely there will be some intensity here. So you take good care of yourselves, and until next one, take care. Namaste.